And we are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel for another episode of Prestige Class. My name's Tony Vicinda. You can find me at Tony Vicinda on social media, but you can find our brand and everything that we do at Plus One EXP across most social media platforms, at least the ones we're on. You can also find all the stuff we do at plus1exp.com. We multi-class in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire is to help designers find great players who love their game and help players find great designers whose games they can love. Prestige Class is a series where we sit down with somebody whose work that we love and talk to them about that work, what they have going on, what influences that, and hopefully learn a little bit of something along the way. If you have any questions while you're watching out there, feel free to let us know in the chat. And our friend Gary, Casualty CDG, is already very excited because he is LinkedIn friends with our guest today. That is Beau Jagr Sheldon. Beau, why don't you tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
So I am Beau Jagr Sheldon. I am a game designer and a general overall creative working in games. I have been doing games for about a decade now actively and been playing games since I was super young in various forms. And I am the designer of Turn, a tabletop role-playing game. I worked on, I edited and curated Behind the Mask. Let Me Take a Selfie is one of my collections that is better known. It's using selfies to play role-playing games, basically. I have a master's in leadership from Duquesne University, and for quite some time in various administrative roles. So I use a lot of that to help inform how I make my games, and my experiences in those places definitely inform those a lot. And I'm also the creator of the Script Change RPG Toolbox, which I made in 2013 and have been updating and revising ever since.
Yeah, I love it. I'm super excited to talk about it. Script Change is actually, though I use Lines, Veils, and X-Card more, Script Change is probably one of my favorite safety tools and toolbox kits for RPGs, and where I originally kind of ran across your work. It's something we're certainly going to get into. But tell me, you said you got into games at kind of a young age. What's one of the first RPGs or games that you remember kind of playing really intentionally and really in depth and just kind of falling in love with?
So I actually got my start doing text-based role-playing on forums and stuff online. I played a lot of like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Redwall kind of nonsense. And then I started playing D&D, Shadowrun, and a couple of other games whenever I was about 15, whenever I met my current spouse. I'm polyamorous, so I have multiple partners, but John is who I have been with since I was a teenager. And we played D&D 3.5, which is not my favorite game. And we played Shadowrun 3rd edition, which is one of my favorite games. And those were like our primary ones. We also played like Mutants and Masterminds and a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of traditional games. But Shadowrun was always like my biggest one that I love the most and got the most into. I now know a lot more about it and its problems, but I still occasionally like to dive back into that crunchy D6 goodness.
we all have those kind of problematic faves. Was it largely theme on that? Was it system? What really for Shadowrun like really spoke to you?
So I really like the kind of punk resistance aspect of it, which we played it a lot more like that than a lot of the game does, because the game itself, the earlier Shadowrun games have a lot of unreliable narrator aspects, and we latched onto that, like as players, like resisting the government, fighting against bad people, and stuff like that was a lot more thematic in our games than I think sometimes the games now show in like 5th edition and stuff. But I loved the mix of like fantasy and science, like the cyber stuff together, because I like both of those things, and having them together in one was much more fun. But I do also like the damage system in Shadowrun 3rd edition is still one of my favorite damage systems of any game I've ever played. And I also really love the things like the flaws and edges that help you like give flavor to your character and, you know, kind of explore like the implications of what a world like you're in means to a person's capabilities.
Mm.
And I'm a big sucker for like a lot of the stuff in Shadowrun. I think I kind of fell in love with the whole thing.
Awesome. Beautiful. Yeah, Shadowrun is one I always wish I could get to the system more. And it's one that like I feel like anytime somebody tries to do a more minimalist version of Shadowrun, it never feels quite as satisfying as, not any of the weird boxed sets that came out recently that were more card games than anything else, but the kind of classic Shadowrun feel never really seems to get hit by anything else. So I love hearing that from other people whenever it comes up.
Yeah.
At what point did you think that, like, did you start designing? Like, I know that we'll talk a lot on stream, like, from the minute we're playing, we're also kind of designing, we're participating in the building of that world, especially once you start running games. That's usually where it kind of like trickles in for people. But what for you was the moment where you were like, oh wait, I'm actually helping design or creating something specifically for this game?
So I had a lot of ideas for things that I would love to see in games, but I didn't know how to go about doing it. And a friend of mine a friend at the time was designing a game and decided to include some stuff that I didn't really like. And we had like a really big blow up about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do my own thing then. Fine. And so I went online and I found Gaming as Women. And this was back whenever I was living and presenting as a woman. And I was like, hey, I want to write an angry blog post about some feelings I have about like consent in games and like consent in content. Can I do this? And so I submitted it and I ended up getting accepted. And from there, I met a whole bunch of people on Google+. And once I had done that, I finally just started making game stuff. I just started creating things and writing about games. And I've been running a blog about games since then, I think. Like something like 2012 or 2013. Thought he's been around forever. And I just basically, as soon as the window opened where I saw other people just design stuff when they wanted to, I started doing the same thing. So
it's cool. And it also sounds like some of it was the critical process around how we engage in games from the very beginning also, not just like, hey, I want to create a system because I really want this spin on a trad game or lucking into storytelling games or whatever it happened to be. There was some of this kind of critical approach to the way that you were even thinking about games as part of your design process. Is that something that you feel like influences pretty much everything you do, is kind of the critical kind of meta conversation around the way you approach game design?
Oh, meta is my life. I'll be honest. Like I'm really big on the meta conversation and meta experiences in game, because as much as I think that like immersion and the game experience are important, we're still people and we still have lives outside of the game. And so like it's helpful sometimes to process stuff through games or maybe to analyze things through our experience in game. But it's also important to remember that we have that separation so that we can make safer choices and, think of how we're impacting others with our choices. I actually, I have had a lot of conversations about basically like how the meta conversation that we have as gamers is really valuable and also underrated. And a lot of people try to erase it and try and say like, I want full immersion. I don't want to have to deal with that stuff. And I'm like, that's fine for you, but don't discount it for other people, right? Because that's important for a lot of other people.
And even your desire for full immersion is actually a meta choice at the end of the day. Like it's not like your player is like, I desire for the person controlling me to be fully immersed in who I am. Like that is a player choice, which is a totally valid player choice. Yeah, I come from pro social gaming, so like my background is low ropes, team development, like and group dynamic theory, and then that influences my game design. So the conversation always is, okay, what experience and conversation do I want to be able to have people to have out of having played this game, even if they never do. Like, even if I can assume that like, hey, it's just a silly game about building fake brands or it's a game about beards, like the conversation should still be, what are the conversations the players can have as they step back from the experience they just went through, and how can they make choices that matter for them and play, hopefully that support immersion where you want it and pull back where you need it. And I think hitting that spot is always really challenging. And so like I said, I think that's such an interesting approach that is something that we've kind of seen from the very beginning. What is there outside of obviously the toolkit that you've developed, what's a game you feel like really crystallizes that that aspect of your design ethos, and how did you kind of incorporate into that game?
So, one of the biggest games that I've ever designed is Turn. And Turn is a game about small town rural shapeshifters. And as shapeshifters, you have basically superpowers. You have super strength, super smell, you have, regeneration that basically makes you invulnerable. And you're also completely ostracized in the way that you can't be out as a shapeshifter to the public at the beginning of the game. And a lot of people very quickly intuit that there are a lot of similarities to being a queer person in the way that I wrote the game, because I lived in a small rural town and I was a person who was mentally ill and disabled in a small town, and I was also queer and I couldn't be out. I was shamed for my mental illness and I was shamed for my disability. And so all three of those things are kind of rolled up into the experience of play for someone playing script change. But it also talks about complexities of privilege. So as a shapeshifter, even if you have this thing that you must keep secret that like people could hurt you over, maybe emotionally, or ostracize you or kick you out for, you also have the ability to kill someone with your bare hands. Like you could just do that if you wanted easily. So the violence rules in the game are one of the biggest examples of the meta, where you choose how much violence you want to do explicitly, and then you have to narrate it. And the rule basically is there because we as players are playing these characters that have this immense power, and if they're alone with someone who's threatening them, they could easily kill them in a hot second. But what are the implications of that morally? And also, as players, do we want to say, I'm choosing to have my character murder someone?
Right.
And that's something that we're doing. And like, what does it say if you're a marginalized person who chooses to harm people because you have some modicum of power over those other people?
Yeah.
And it's a really complex conversation. And I think it's very challenging for a lot of people sometimes when they play, because we don't think of any marginalized people as having any power at times. And sometimes we forget that there are intersections and complex relations of different types of identities that can make it hard for people to kind of think about that balance. Mm-hmm. And so that's there's a lot of essays in the book where I wrote about my own experiences and how like I felt powerless some of the time, but also there were things that I could do that other people couldn't. And especially like the race essay that was included was really important, because like the people who were racially marginalized in my communities had so much less power.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important conversation, and having people like talk about it on a higher level while playing the game was something I was hoping would happen.
That's awesome. No, I love seeing that, like those kind of things evolve within play. And again, I love the concept of like when designers include design notes, not just about mechanics, but about themes and why that's important, or when they include essay work, or like there's an anthology that just came out that's about like character death and end of life issues, that the name of is escaping me right now, and I'll find and drop it in the show notes later on. YouTube.
Definitely, I would love to check that out. I love talking about character death.
Yeah, and it's just essays, right? Like, but it is such a great reflective piece on that, and I still need to pick up a copy, but it was just an interesting concept, and I would love to see more designers do that. Now, like I published a lot of things at Zine Weight, and so do a lot of other people, and so it's like, choosing to turn a page over to something like that is sometimes hard for people, but I think it's absolutely worth saying like, hey, add 15, 20 cents to your physical copy, digital, it doesn't cost you anything, and include some of these conversations you'd love to see people having as part of the dialogue around play. I think there's such power there. Blood Feud that came out recently, like their decompressed process, which was a complex game that had a lot of people have a lot of different feels about it. A lot of those feelings are entirely valid. I really enjoyed playing it with a pretty diverse crew, and the decompressed process at the end was really valuable. And even as somebody who doesn't experience or doesn't exhibit a lot of toxic masculinity, I'd like to think any, but like I'm also a person who knows that I'm flawed, and the process of the dialogue at the end helped make some things concrete that I think in my mind I keep pretty wishy-washy because it keeps me from having to face them myself. And so the strengths of some of those processes in games can be absolutely great for the person who is receiving them, who needs that to be named. And so things like turn, you being able to explore those experiences gives freedom to other people to do the same thing, name the
Right.
thing, crystallize the thing through play, and hopefully in a safe environment and safe space. So, um, so let's talk a little bit about that. You, like I said, the first place I encountered your work was through the script change safety tool. For people who are unfamiliar with safety tools in general, how would you define safety tools or RPG toolkits to somebody who'd never heard that term before?
So basically, while a lot of the time we say that the purpose of a safety tool is to make a safer table, a lot of what a safety tool or toolkit is purposed to do is to give players and the facilitator more agency to control how they engage with the content, what the content is, and how they react to content that is introduced that makes them uncomfortable or is unwanted. And basically, you can start from having even something as simple as something like the X card, where all you do is say, hey, I don't want that, let's move on. And that's a safety tool. But there are more complex things like wrap meetings and script change, where they are instead a workshop where you talk about what experiences you had in the game and how you felt about them to process them and go past the difficult things. I think that there are a large variety of safety and content tools that we use, and they all have a little bit of a different purpose. And I think different people interact with them in different ways. Some people even change the tools for their table specifically, which is something I even encourage with script change, because everyone has unique needs, and expecting one thing to fit everyone's experience is not really accurate. So the tools are basically a way for you to formalize the meta and use that meta conversation to make sure that your experience at the table is as enjoyable and as safe as possible. There's no such thing as a truly safe table because there's no such thing as a truly safe environment. It's a myth, basically. You can feel comfortable, you can feel safer, you can feel like you can, raise a question or object to content, but we never know the things that could be raised that could possibly hit a button that we didn't even know about. So it's important to have formalized ways of saying, hey, maybe we should do something differently.
Right.
And that's what these tools are for.
Yeah, and like I said, there people may be familiar, like on stream, our basic one, because it's just really easy, is Linesvale's X card. There's different people will use different ones. Some of these are also like I like use them as meeting and tool agenda, like consensus building tools and other things that are out there that are used in group development or in corporate meetings or other things like that, are oftentimes their own kind of version of safety tools or play tools that help us understand how in this organization are we moving forward and navigating these conversations. It's not just in games. And it's also been really interesting to me is to see the hesitancy of some people to do this, because I would actually kind of posit that every designer is making a choice about what goes into their game, and they're making design decisions that influence what they hope is the desired outcome for the way that people are playing and engaging with the material. So we're always including, even by absence, different tools that we're giving people to do it. And that can be just articulated as like, if you give people combat mechanics, what you're saying is combat can happen and does happen in this game, right? Like there's a choice that's made there. If you're giving social dynamics, or social tools, you're saying the social interaction can and does happen in this game. If you're giving tools that manage, weight and torchlight and other things like that, you're saying these are things that are important in this game. We're going to have a conversation around them.
Right.
And the safety tools are really a very specific subset of that are designed, again, on that meta level to say, hey, here's the conversation we're going to have as we engage in the other mechanics of this game. And I think I think that's such an important thing for us to consider, because for me, like my best experiences of playing, which I was lucky, have all come out of like the first group I sat down with had a way of interacting, a way of behaving. They had a wiki because they'd been running for 20 years when I stepped into it across like 3 or 4 different settings. So they needed things to say, hey, here's how we keep things consistent as we move between settings and groups and other stuff like that. So I was able to receive the group expectations in a written form before stepping in. Now that's something that group set up. It's not a common thing for people the first time they sit around
But
the
like
table.
there's so much beauty in having group expectations, and that's something that I tried to formalize a little bit with like having the conversation at the beginning of your game in script change, as well as doing things like your picks, squicks, and icks to say what's okay to play and what's not okay to play and what you want to see. And I think that a large thing that sticks with me with the whole like use of safety tools is like there's a lot of emphasis sometimes to make them hidden and make them parts of the setting, which can be valuable in its own right. But I think that it's important to also have the meta conversation, because you really want your tools, your safety tools, to be able to govern even the mechanics of the game, even integrate into the social contract, so that people know that somebody's not going to be able to call them on a technicality in the rules to override their concern about safety. And so I think that like having those kinds of things formalized in some fashion and having them be a top level kind of thing is really important. So I love to hear that games are any groups are doing things like having group expectations and stuff like that. That's really great.
Yeah, for me, we used script change as like, so Beards and Beyond, which is our game that just came out, right? Which everybody just assumes is like a dumb, funny little game, but it's actually a very seriously designed, earnest game that just happens to be about beards. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and you know, like I kind of actually my biggest regret about the way that we use script change mechanics was we put it in the GM section towards the back of the book. Now it's a short, book, so that's not that's not an unreasonable thing. But if I had thought about it more intentionally, I would have put it, because we covered the structure of play a little bit earlier in the GM section. And if I had thought about it, the reason I chose script change is because it's a cinematic. We use a cinematic mode of play, and tracking time and moving and advancing the story forward, and as our GM resource. And I used script change because it was also cinematic, and we referenced that, and we kind of pair those things with each other. But I just didn't put them right next to each other in the book, and so it can read as an optional thing. And even the way I wrote it was, we want people to use tools. So if this isn't the one you want to use, pick a different set, but pick a set. Like, have a conversation around it. That's fine. But we thought it was important. And, this was, I picked it up before the new version of it, and we expanded. Like, I wanted people to do more of a writer's room, more of a zero session, more of a, like, set the rating for your game, set, like, what are the things people are excited about? What type of things do they want to do? And we did that as part of our, like, for our ongoing campaign that we just launched, like, on air, because we think that conversation is incredibly important for people to see as normal. And they actually end up being some of people's favorite sessions, in my experience. Like the sitting down and discussing, here's what we want in the movie or the TV show or the whatever that we're about to essentially embark on making together, the story we're about to tell. Let's sit down and define some of that. And the character creation process for us is kind of this jump forward and backwards process where we establish an in media res shot, and then that is right on the edge of action, and then we flash back to where everybody was 24 hours before they got pulled into this crazy adventure. And it lets us establish motifs and themes about the players and the characters and the choices they're going to make and what's important to them, as part of that process. And it flowed really well into script change that has some of those same mechanics and abilities built in as a toolkit, to being the best one for our system to use. But I've loved the way that you kind of expanded some of the tool set from the original into some of those bigger conversational elements. So script change came out, you said 2013, correct?
Yeah, that's when I initially like wrote it and released it. And I released it like just on G+. There was no like itch.io, so like and at the time there weren't really a lot of like safety tools or anything on anything like drive through or anything like that. So I was working on a game called Tabletop Blockbuster, later renamed Blockbuster, that's still kind of shelved, with my spouse. And I wanted to make a safety tool anyway, and that's the cinematic like terminology, like rewind and fast forward and all that. It was partially because we were making a game that was cinematic, but also because I find those phrases so easy to use. And like pause, especially, like I use that as a regular thing during daily life. I tell people to pause if I'm overwhelmed. I use pause like in intimate situations as like a safe word. It is a phrase that I use constantly, and that's where it started. I was like, let me build off of this. And so it started out as just rewind, fast forward, and pause. And then I've built on it like over the years until it's now like a whole suite kind of various tools that do a lot of different things, and you can use them like basically as you prefer for your situation or your game. And I think that I know that script change has actually been used for therapeutic purposes in games played with autistic kids and people with special needs regarding their like social situations. And I think that that's really great. And I'd like to see it continue to be used in as many places as it can, because I find it makes me have a safer experience. And I also just like it because it's really good for controlling content. Like, even if you're not looking for like, this is triggering to me and I want to avoid it, sometimes it's just really nice to be able to be like, I actually really don't care about aliens. Can we please like rewind and have a different topic?
Right.
Because the alien element is not grabbing me. And I think that we have had 10 times better game experiences since we started using it, because you just have so much more control over what's going on, and it's more clear to everyone that the control is there.
Yeah. I was talking with some people right online, and I mentioned this to you, and in the Gauntlet Slack channel, it's a good conversation about safety and play. Somebody was asking about streaming. Somebody said they think streaming is inherently dangerous. I said, I think playing RPGs is kind of inherently dangerous. Like you said, there's no actual thing as a safe space, but I 100% agree that streaming something amplifies that danger, right? Like it's all of a sudden. And I think part of the challenge is people think that play kit tools and safety tools are there for when things go wrong. And I love the emphasis and shift, both in the script change mechanic with the new edition, as well as in the evolution of play with safety tools in general, the use of them to say, it's not just about when things go wrong. It's actually about saying, how do we make this game as enjoyable as possible for everybody? So things like highlights, 2 thumbs up, like being able to throw in things that are like, these are the things I am looking for when we play the game. These are the things I will be excited about. And being able to say, no, rewind, I don't actually want it. Like, that's not interesting to me or exciting to me, or I don't want to go that direction. Here's what I was excited about and what I think we're building to. How does everybody feel about that? Is a conversation that arises because safety mechanics have gotten us to the point where we're okay saying, pause, can I pitch something as an idea to the group? Okay, like let's resume and we're going to go that direction. Right. Those types of things, that type of exchange, those are some of the best ones. We played Worldwide Wrestling last week, which uses X card and one other play mechanic in that concept, but Jeff Stormer was a part of that conversation. So like the pause, let's pitch, like let's talk about where we think this is going, as we got into the best part of the session, where it's the final scene, the drama's high, everything's tense, and talking through what we all are hoping happens, and everybody ended up being on the same page. But it just took a little bit of pause. Here's where I think we're going. Is that where you think we're going? Great. All right, resume. Let's go. Let's go do that. Right. And that kind of check-in is incredibly healthy. And Jeff and tons of other people that I've played with, they're able to do that in an entirely energetic, like excited way that lets people know, like, this isn't about something having gone wrong, right? Nobody should hesitate to use the X card or use a pause or use a rewind. Like, there are plenty of good reasons to do it, to name it, or just say, pause, I really love what's happening right now, and I just can't wait to see what happens next. Like, those types of things come from play and safety tools. And we might do them naturally as players anyways sometimes, but I think naming those tools gives us so much more of an ability to do it in a way that enhances instead of distracts from play.
Right. Like, formalizing is really important to me because I struggle personally with having permission to do things. I came from an environment where kind of interrupting to be excited or objecting to something because it's not making me happy was something I was not really allowed to do. And as I got older, I realized that being able to like say, hey, like, this does excite me, but if we could just do it a little bit this way more, that would help and I would feel more engaged. And capture that with like, and like with the 2 thumbs up, which was added in January, I I love the idea. There's a tool called the OK check-in, and I really liked that tool, but for me it wasn't like comprehensive enough of like how I need to be able to respond to someone. Because like, if I just ask somebody if they're okay and they're not, that doesn't solve the problem for me. For me, I need like full information. And so by giving like the different like ways of responding with emojis or using like thumbs up, thumb down, like, it's complex, but at the same time, it's stuff that we can easily learn. And it's stuff that if we normalize it, like, in normalizing checking in with other people in the first place makes you have a better experience. Because if somebody's like zoning out or like freezing up while they're playing, it ruins the fun for them and it impacts the fun for other people.
Right.
And so it's important to like give positive feedback in like the rap meetings and to use the highlight reels to like really be like, this is what we're really liking together. And it also gives the opportunity for somebody to be like, everybody else is liking this, but maybe could we do it like in a way that doesn't have this happen when we go forward and make that a better experience for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have conversations. And that's part of what script change is about encouraging people feeling free to raise a question and say like, hey, I like this and I want to ask if we can do something more or do something different. And I care about the people at the table with me, and caring about the people at the table with you matters.
Mm-hmm.
And this facilitates developing that relationship.
Yeah, and they're like taking it back, and because I also would be interested in your play on this. Like we talked a little bit about streams, and it's something that obviously I do a lot, and I'll have those moments. Like I refuse to. Well, I don't refuse to. I very rarely run games while running stream, just because of the amount of mental energy. But it also takes me away from being able to then focus on the player experience. Because if I'm watching the stream, running the game, and then trying to watch what my players are doing, I'm doing less of a good job for my players in the moment. And when I do, typically it's a smaller group. Like I'll drop a person out because then I'm like, okay, look, 3 is easier than 4, and I can give people the 4 level of focus at least when I'm running and running stream. But you know, one of the conversations that came up in that dialogue on the gauntlet was people not feeling comfortable exercising the use of tools. When they're on a stream specifically, because again, it feels like, oh, I'm going to be ruining people's fun. Or then here's the thing, I have to explain that. Like, you know, I have to explain, like, even if I don't have to, even if nobody asked me, like, I know that people are wondering, why was that not okay? And it puts people on the spot in a different way, which I thought was a really, really solid and excellent take that the person who brought it up made. And I feel like I've watched that happen. And I feel like for me, like I'm constantly, when somebody else is running the game and we're on stream, I'm watching for that player disengagement, because then I can kind of mini GM and throw them action, check in with them in kind of non-consequential ways, right? But then it still feels limited. It feels like we don't have full range of motion. Other than getting comfortable, which seems like a good thing to do, and we constantly try to do, like we do. I do 2 versions of Lines, Veils, and X card when we do it, or whatever safety mechanic. We do it before we go live, so that if somebody doesn't want to talk about something on air, they don't have to, and I can just say these are the lines we've already established for this session, and we can go from there, and they don't have to be on the spot. But do you have any advice for people who may be streaming or maybe doing public play or live play, as far as how they can feel most comfortable engaging in some of these mechanics, or recommendations for people running those type of games?
So I have a lot of feelings about this, actually. Uh, so the first thing is like having a before you stream discussion where you do lines and veils, or do pick squicks and icks or something like that before you go on screen is definitely great. And I do recommend doing that. And also having just a regular check-in on like physical and emotional health is a really good idea, because you can identify any possible fail points of like, if somebody's burnt out, maybe they need people to be a little bit more gentle with them, and it's important to consider that as people, as part of a team, you know, playing a game, you know. But I also think that one thing that would really help is being public about the safety tools we're using and why. I feel like it would not hurt any stream at the beginning of the stream to have a 5-minute, hey, we're using these safety tools, and if they come up in game, if somebody rules something out, that's their, you know, personal needs and experience. And so we're not going to interrogate them about that. We're going to accept that they just want to have a better time and support them in that. And I feel like there is a big push to not have it clear that you're using a meta tool.
Yeah.
Because it feels like it's interrupting or it's distracting. But in reality, it's no different than having commercials or ads or promos for your Patreon or anything like that. And it's an accessibility issue, because not only does that let the people in the comments and who are viewing it have the opportunity to be like, okay, maybe I should use a safety tool for me, because what's happening in the game is stressful for me and I shouldn't watch this right now.
Yeah.
But it also gives power to the people who are on the stream to be like, no, I want to be able to continue playing. I'm in this situation and I cannot extricate myself necessarily because it's a professional engagement sometimes. but I can say, hey, like, let's pause and take a minute to make sure we're all on the same page. And that way we can have a better experience. And it also models the behavior that we're saying we think is good.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. And I think like we'll sometimes do content warnings for like, cause we do it, like I said, we do it beforehand so people can have privacy. We do it during because we want to normalize the conversation. Sometimes I remember to address the audience, like, and that's usually content or caution warnings, but making sure we're reminding the audience we do these things for this reason. And I think even giving, like, naming the agency for the audience and reminding them that like the players have the exact same agency as they do, in the sense of like, you can choose to stop watching this whenever you want. They should choose to be able to stop the action, also, and normalizing that more and more, but having that, because it's a meta conversation, right? It's like we're playing the game and we're having this meta conversation around the table, but we're also being watched, and here is the other level of that conversation and how we do that. I think is super helpful. It's also, again, one of the reasons why, and maybe we should, and this is not just because you're on, I thought for a while maybe using the script change mechanic on streams makes a whole lot of sense also thematically. But it's really easy to, if you just say pause, like, everyone's going to stop and everyone's going to know what you mean, and it's going to be fine. If you say, can we rewind a second? Like, it's going to feel normal and natural in those moments. And I think it is, again, some of it's using like, what is the best tool for this setting? And it is, again, one of the things, like I when I write a cinematic game, I use script change. I use cats other times. We use lines and veils because it's simple, but or if the system dictates, here are your play tools, we use the system ones without a doubt. But some of that really normalizes a lot of that language, and I think that's very cool. Also, hello to Keegan and to BLG. Thanks. Yeah, we're excited to have you here with us also too for this part of the conversation. I love that, and we probably talked forever about this. Again, I would encourage people to just think not only about these things within games, but normalizing them, like you said, in other parts of their conversation. Like, I used to run events for 80 to 120 teenagers that were like weekend-long events, and it was very common for me to basically, I would always give the small group leaders check-in tools, and from the front of the room, I would use some of those same ones, like thumbs up, some sideways, thumbs down, just to see where people were at. And it wasn't just like general feelings; it was like sleep, food, emotional. Like, where are you at right now?
We really undervalue, I think, the physiological and emotional status of our players and our facilitators whenever we go into a game. And I have actually started, whenever I participate in games, checking in with people, like, do you actually feel up to playing? Like, are you feeling tired? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you like in a crisis about something? Can you tell me how I can support you? And if I don't have the energy to support them, I'm honest about that. I'll be like, hey, here's how I'm feeling today. I don't know if I can actually play the game because it might touch on emotional stuff. And I know that's harder with streaming because you have an obligation financially or to schedules or whatever. But I do think it is important to be honest with like how people are feeling physically and emotionally, because that informs your ability to play. And we forget that so much, I think, as players, because for us it's supposed to be a fun thing, right? It's a game, right? We're going to have a good time. But whenever we're playing games that deal with complex topics and emotions, suddenly it's like a lot harder to sit for 3 or 4 hours, and like maybe if you have like pain that you don't want to talk about too much but it's still happening, letting everybody know, hey, I'm in pain, so I might be a little bit more irritable in game, is something so valuable. And the honesty makes the experience a lot better. Because people can then like maybe shoulder some of the stressful stuff for you in game if they have the energy, or you can take more breaks or things like that. So I think it's important to like look at us as a holistic individual and a holistic group. Like, it's not just we're together to play a game today. It's, hey, we're people coming together as part of a community to engage in an activity, and your body and your mind factor into that.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that's huge. And like I said, I think it's the more people can get in the, if you're a GM out there, if you're a designer out there who wants to normalize these things, I think using them more and more in other aspects of your life, being considered these concepts as you go about your daily, like, absolutely makes it feel way more normal. Just do it in a game all the time. And then it's not about anything other than this is good conscientious like community engagement and group management, and considering the fullness of people. Because if I ever had somebody who's like, oh, I can't make a game at the last minute, like if it's the designer, that's a bummer, and we're not gonna stream, right? Like that's whatever. But I've had people push back on me the day before, like I'm stretched too thin. Great, like I don't want to stream your game that's going into a Kickstarter launch next week because for me, like I want to stream it for you, and if this isn't a good time for you, like that's all I'm here for. Like
Right.
I don't care. Like I want you to be taken care of. And so if we're going to push back for 2 weeks and do it mid campaign, like, is that the best strategic decision? Maybe, maybe not, who knows? But if you're going to be worn down by this, and that's going to make the campaign that much harder for you, or just today that much harder for you, it's just not worth it. Like it's not. And I'm
Right.
okay with that. If a player backs out, like we're going to pop out. Hey, we need one more player, and we're going to look at the people who say they can or can't, or we're just going to go with one less player, and it's not a big deal, like in a
Right.
2-player game that might matter. In a 4-player game, like we're just playing with 3 players now, that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
and so like I would encourage people on streams even just to keep in mind that conscious thing. It's one of the reasons I'm not super interested in regular, like weekly, this is the time we stream at streams, because that's hard.
Well, especially right now, like we're in a damn panorama, and like nobody is up to where they normally are. So I think that learning to care for each other in that way will help us even coming out of the stuff that's going on in the world right now, and hopefully into a better future. Like I think that learning to care for each other in that way is it's a good practice that will help us in the long run to create better communities and a better industry that is less toxic. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's pivot for a little bit. Let's talk about your most recent project, The Man and the Stag, because you did something interesting with this. You are one of 5-ish people that I know who have done an itch funding project, using itch to basically crowdfund a project rather than Kickstarter or other means. I'd love to talk about how it went, some of the lessons you learned, and why. We are hoping to get you, Thomas, Jeff, Adam, and whoever else wants to at some point on in the future, Keegan, to talk about itch funding as a practice, as what we're learning from some of that, and have a bigger dialogue around it. But I would just love to hear from you about how it went, what you learned, and what some of the choices were to put The Man and the Stag up. But first, before we do that, just tell us about the game itself.
So, The Man and the Stag is a 2-player game using playing cards and prompts to explore a cosmic connection between the man and the stag, which can be represented by different things and neither tied by gender or anything like that. They're just kind of archetypes representing the difference and difficulties between humanity and nature, and talking about the kind of passage of time and how we kind of cope with change and things like loss or complications that make one side of the world, the humans and the things that we do in technology and all those things, uh, potentially harm the other side, uh, with nature and the environment and the cosmos. And it's a lot simpler in writing than it ends up being in play, from my experience, which is actually really fun because it's not a very long game, and it's mostly made up of like prompts and laying cards out and stuff like that. But the 2-player interaction is really intimate, and you tell some really rich stories about this like tie between this man or the character that is in the place of the man and their kind of deep connection and also conflict with the stag, who represents things like the cosmos and nature and how we sometimes struggle with that, but also find peace in it.
I love it. So tell us about the choice to itch fund and how it went, what you learned from the process.
So I was definitely not the first person to do this, obviously. But Thomas actually started his campaign before mine with the Greeblin's Journey, which is actually still going. He extended it, so go to itch for Thomas Novosel, A Greeblin's Journey, and back that now. It's a fun single player game. I had encouraged Thomas to use it because it's a little bit simpler of a process than Kickstarter. It's not as intensive. People aren't constantly like tagging you or hitting a button to remind you to update. And since he's in school, I thought it would be easier for him. And I did the same with The Man in the Sag for that, and also because I couldn't change my name on Kickstarter. And I'm in the process of changing my name legally, and I want my projects to show that. And I still have not been able to change my name on Kickstarter. So between that and some of my weird feelings about like the ethics of Kickstarter with their union complications over the past year or so, and just the way that they put in a button that encourages backers to basically send you a message that's anonymous and like update your page and tell us what's going on. And I get those years after my projects were done.
And that appears in red at the top of your bar anytime you go to Kickstarter, which is the most threatening and annoying color it could possibly have been.
Yeah, it feels the platform itself for me is of Kickstarter is very intimidating and stressful. And I've run 3 projects on it. I did Turn, I did Behind the Mask, and I did Homunculus Assembly Line with John W. Sheldon, my partner. And I value the success that we had on the platforms, but the platform itself does encourage a certain amount of, you must be marketing constantly. You have to constantly be dealing with backer input and engagement in a way that for me as a disabled person is just not doable. And also like some of the interface is just really rough, and it's also blinding white, which is very hard for someone with post-concussion syndrome. So I was like, I'll do itch and see how it works. Like the worst that happens is it fails, and otherwise people will get a cool game. So I finished the basic draft of the game in a simple layout and put it up, and that was good enough. Like I managed to reach my goal in the time that I set it, which was $1,000, and I had a lot of really nice feedback, and some people played the game, which was really cool. And my intent is within the next week or so to finish up the layout, add the additional content, and integrate the art that I had done for it. And that was most of what the purpose of the Itch Funded was for, was to pay for art, because while 2 of the people doing the art are my partners, they're incredibly skilled artists who this is their job.
Yeah.
And so I want to pay them.
Imagine that, like, wanting to pay people, whether you love them or not.
Yeah. So. And it's like, it's so hard sometimes to like want to put out stuff, because while I use public domain art or my own art sometimes, that doesn't do as well as like using incredible art from Mix Morgan or from John or from Thomas, because their art is amazing and completely captured what I intended with the game. So I think that the project itself was really cool to do that way, because I could interact with people the same way I did on Kickstarter. But HEO as a platform is so much less focused on that market, like gunning forward. This is a campaign kind of vibe, that I could do so at a pace that was more comfortable for me. And as a disabled person who I literally just went through an extended ketamine treatment for depression and PTSD. And during some of those days, I could not do anything. Like right. Whenever you get an infusion, sometimes you're out of it for like hours. And I had to just sit there and be like, I can't update my stuff. I can't promote. I can't do those things. But I knew that Itch would have it on the page. I knew that people could share it. And I also knew that the pressure wasn't as high. And so that mattered to me a lot.
Awesome. No, it's a gorgeous project. I loved seeing it pop up. You know, we on the channel here have been a big fan of people using Itch and thinking about how different platforms interact with each other. Like I think my next project, I'll probably do a very small Itch goal to prep for a physical launch on Kickstarter if I do a Kickstarter again, because there's a lot of value into getting the digital out there, getting it done, getting that good version that you really like and are excited to showcase, and then seeing where it can go and what does a print run look like. And maybe I won't use Kickstarter. Maybe we'll use a different crowdfunding platform, or maybe we will. Like it's, you know, like, but it's engaging an Itch in that more developmental mindset of here's how the project can advance through that, I think is incredibly interesting. I think it's something people need to be thinking more about right now, because you can, I think Jeff Stormer also put it this way. It's about being able to apply solid marketing principles to our game that we can't do through Kickstarter in the same way. Right. And I think it's just a really interesting process, and was really didn't want to pass up the chance to talk about it since we're having you on as well. If anybody out there has a question, let us know. We're about to finish up, but if somebody else wants to know something, we'd love to toss it in. Here's one from Jeremy Childry, who I think who said you had interviewed the Bound with likely mostly white folks. Any thoughts on the role of the keeper and responsibilities in that situation?
So I have not played Harlow Unbound. I think it's a really amazing game. I think it's beautifully done. I think that whenever you're coming up with like a whole bunch of white people as a white people, um, going into a game that is heavy about race, I think that you should definitely be comfortable giving them homework. This is something that's kind of frowned upon by some people. I will be honest about that. But prep work for games is something we do all the time.
Right.
And it is not unreasonable for you to tell the people that you're running the game for, hey, before we get to the table, I need you to read these basic concepts and understand what we're going into. Have them look at Wikipedia pages for the time period. Have them look at some stuff on race and basic stuff. Tell them to Google it themselves or give them a couple of names to go by. Even tell them to look at Chris Spivey's posts on the work that he did. Rather than you carrying all of that workload, you should definitely offload some of it onto these people who are playing the game, because it's their responsibility as much as anyone else's. But I definitely recommend using safety tools for that situation, primarily for yourself, but also for them, because if they don't understand something, they can always ask for a pause and ask for an explanation or look it up or something like that, rather than steamrolling into a situation and saying something stupid. As someone who has played a game, like played stuff like Shadowrun that's full of like appropriation and everything like that, I have had to stop and educate myself about that. And it is the responsibility of white people to educate themselves about race matters.
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend giving some advanced homework and using safety tools that like support you as the creator of the game situation, like as the person setting the scenes and setting the gameplay situation, and making sure that you feel comfortable using those tools as well to support your play.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, when people have, like, I recently went through it with a couple different projects, but like anytime you're playing a game that represents a group of people, doing that homework, but also being in conversation with people who that community absolutely represents is the other key part. So even like, obviously, if you're playing with a mostly white group, it's not like go ask your black friend, because there's this problematic also too. But for you to think about as the creator, like, okay, like I am the one who's kind of mediating some of this relationship. Are there people I can get insight from that I'm not asking to do emotional labor, but I'm asking to give me good information about it, is absolutely appropriate, especially if it's the game's creator. The game's creator is, again, probably looking to encourage a type of dialogue around this game. And so thinking about that, asking them, looking at resources that sometimes are named in the back of a book, can all be really helpful things to do. This came up with when we talked about it in the Brain Trust a little bit. Somebody was like, hey, like you should talk more about the Trans Rage anthology. And I was like, well, I'm happy to, but only if I've talked to Laura about that first, because otherwise, like, there's a conversation that Laura's trying to have with the people consuming this game. I don't want to be the cis dude on the outside of this commenting on that conversation with no thing. So we had Laura on for a conversation about that. But Coyote and Crow was the other one. And Coyote and Crow, which is a Native American RPG that's up on Kickstarter right now, does a great job of expressing how it wants people who are not Native to engage in the work. And that is, even on the Kickstarter page, it's very clear it's for everybody. But as I was going through the beta rules that they gave me, there were moments where they would pause and they would say, like, if you're not Native, this. If you are Native, this. And it was just very clear, because you know whether you're one of those two things or not. And so if you are Native, other identifiers could include your tribe of origin and how it's represented in this alt future fantasy world. And if you're not Native, don't choose that option. You can put in other identifiers, but your tribe isn't going to be one of them because you don't have one. You shouldn't just go and pick one that you really love, because that's not honoring what the intent of the creators are. The way that they did food, the way they did a lot of other things, the way they embrace gender with Two-Spirit and other things like that. They don't want people who aren't Native engaging in being Two-Spirit gender, because there are parts of what that signifies that are specific to Native culture. There's a lot of really beautiful ways that they just paused and said, within the context of the rules, and said, hey, this is how we want you to engage in the game this way. This is how we want you. And it takes so much of the pressure off of guessing. And then the other one was just be willing to be corrected. So you as the keeper, if you need to pause and say, the way you're behaving right now is a parody, a pastiche, it's damaging. Like, you need to pause, you need to stop, you need to think about what you're doing. That should be the end of the conversation. They should pause, they should stop, they should think about what they're doing. And no, it's not a judgment. It's just a simple correction for them to be aware of. And so I think naming those safety tools in advance and not asking people to do the emotional labor, but seeking the counsel for you of people who might know what are good ways to navigate this is absolutely what I've ended up having to do as somebody who comes to games as a white guy, and wants to do better and wants to know better, is just saying, I want to be in a relationship. I'll do the emotional energy. Like, I don't want anybody else to do the emotional labor for me. But I do want to have these conversations with anybody who's willing to help me do and be better. And so,
yeah, I would definitely say, like, no matter the context of the game that you're running, if you're running a game and someone is insensitive, if they ignore safety tools or anything like that in defense of their own perspective of how someone should be represented, or in a way that harms you, if you are the person GMing the game, or if you're another player in the game, it's okay to ask for that person to not be a part of the situation anymore. And I try to point this out sometimes because we have a really like hard time ejecting people from games, but especially in the case of things like race or people being transphobic or anything like that, it is okay for you to say, hey, you aren't respecting me, you aren't following the rules that we set up at front of the game, and this is not something that you get to be engaged in anymore.
Right.
And that's okay. And I'm mostly saying this because I know that most people know that, but sometimes we feel like we need permission to take that kind of action to protect ourselves and the other players. So I think that the big thing is just use your safety tools and make sure that people educate themselves, as well as doing things to support yourself by reaching out to other people like you and who would like benefit you from their knowledge without demanding emotional labor from them.
And people who are unwilling to listen on those small things in a game are unwilling to listen on bigger things and are going to become more problematic as time goes on.
100%. 100%.
So because they're primarily focused on what their own experiences is to the detriment of other people. And that's going to be you, and that's going to be others. And it's not a fair thing. Now, if somebody's like, I don't understand, that's fine. You don't have to understand. What we do need you to do is change your behavior. And then later on, when we're all in a place to do it, after the game's over, a beverage or just over a meal, when we're in a good place for it, we can have that conversation. But if you're just totally unwilling to like stop, then we can't.
Yeah.
And
it's okay to use stuff like rap meetings to like have those conversations in a structured way where you ask each other questions and address points of concern or confusion. But they still have to understand that they can't repeat their behavior or continue the behavior that is harmful, regardless of what that behavior is.
Yeah. And that's for me always the big red flag. Someone who's unwilling to stop, like, it's only going to get worse. So like it's a huge early sign of a hard decision you might have to make as a GM. That's awesome. We haven't seen any more questions. Beau, I just would love to give you the chance one more time. Where's the best place for people to find your work?
So you can find my website at brebeau.com. That's BRIEBEAU.com. And that has Thoughty, which is my blog. It also has all my photography and links to my games and stuff like that. I'm on IPR for print copies of my games. ttrpg has some of my PDF copies, including Of the Woods, which is only on drive-thru, and that is a charitable project for the Trevor Project. And I also have a ton of stuff on brebeau.itch.io. There's a host of games. I put one up last night. So there's a whole bunch of things.
I'm gonna go look at it. What do we got?
It's called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. It's a business card game for the Pleasure Not Business Card Jam. And it's about coping with chronic pain and chronic illness whenever it changes and you have to deal with that. It's very simple, but it's something I'm dealing with right now that I thought I would kind of immortalize. So,
I'll go ahead and say it again. I love that about your design. Like, I love that you are somebody who is willing to take other people on your journey with you, and encourage people to do that safely and keeping yourself safe through that process, and who uses games to have that public conversation. Like, it is incredibly important. It is incredibly meaningful. And it actually, like, it matters a whole lot. And so I just want, if no one's told you recently, I really appreciate it. And thank you very, very much for doing that in all of your designs. And so
thank you. I really appreciate it. As far as sharing my experiences, you can find me on Twitter way more than I should be. I I have a professional account, which is Thoughty Games. I recommend following that one if you're interested in games. And I also have like 6 other accounts. But the major one where I talk about life stuff and my experiences is Beau Jagr, just my first and middle name. And I'm also on a lot of other social medias, but that's the one that I use the most. So you can follow me wherever you find me, but you'll find the most conversation on those on Twitter right now.
Awesome.
So
Well, so glad to have you here today. I got to learn a lot. I hope everybody else did also. Again, I want to encourage everybody to think about what play tools, specifically what safety tools you're using that help best reinforce the type of play you're trying to use, whether it's script change, whether it's line fails X card, cats, any of the other systems that are out there, or whether you're looking at some of them yourself and trying to figure out what makes the most sense in your game. Just remember, when you design, you're giving people tools that they're using to navigate those games. So this has been Prestige Class with Beau, Jagr, Sheldon. And class is dismissed. And now I got to get the title card up real quick.